Hello everyone and welcome to this new episode of 10 Questions About Cloud. Today we have a very special guest. I'm a huge fan of his blog, of his podcast. Welcome, Yan Cui.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I always use the first question to introduce yourself. So basically, who is Yan Cui and what do you do?
Yeah, sure. So, well, my name's Yan, and I've been working with AWS for over 10 years now. I guess I first started running stuff on AWS in 2010, I guess maybe end of 2009. So back then it was all just EC2. There's not many services available. We're still using SimpleDB at the time, and then over time they've introduced more and more services. The last maybe I'll say 5-6 years, I've focused on what you may consider serverless technologies, things like Lambda, DynamoDB, and a number of other services that kind of goes in that territory, like API Gateway, AppSync, and so on. And the last maybe, I guess, 2 years, I've been working as an independent consultant. I work with companies all around the world and help them adopt serverless and basically find the best practices and help them in terms of just trying to find ways to succeed with serverless, because it's a new paradigm. It's a very different way of thinking about architecture. And there's different way of in terms of building your application. And sometimes it takes teams a bit of time to make that mindset change and to learn the new technologies. So that's where I come in. And I also work with Lumigo as a developer advocate. And Lumigo is it's a really powerful troubleshooting platform for serverless applications. You can think of it as, if you have your CloudWatch as well as your X-Ray combined together, but on steroids. There's no manual instrumentation. Everything kind of just works out of the box, and it captures every single things that's happening in your Lambda function, so you can easily find out what's actually going on. And I use Lumigo in my client projects as well, because I think it does make my life a lot easier when it comes to having to maintain a system on my own. Other than that, I have video courses on AppSync, on Lambda, on step functions. I have workshops on how to build production-ready serverless applications, and I do a lot of conference talks, and I do a lot of blog posts, and I also run my own podcast as well called the Real World Serverless, where I talk to other people who also build stuff in production with serverless technologies and see what they are doing and any problems that they run into, and any useful information that they can share with me and other people who are interested in the serverless.
Wow, really impressive. You started your cloud journey really, really early. And following to that question, maybe just for curiosity, you can tell us your first steps towards the cloud. When was the first time you heard about the cloud? Yeah, you already mentioned, but how was these first steps?
Yeah, so that was 2009, I guess. I was at the time I was working for a investment bank in the UK, in Canary Wharf. And I was just reading about various different things happening, and I was getting to the point where I realized that I had to get out of banking because I was building systems that used by 20 people. I wasn't doing anything remotely cutting edge, and I was reading about all these wonderful things other people are doing, and I want to be part of that. So I was looking around for a new job, and a company called GameSys gave me an opportunity to join the social gaming team, and they were already fully running on AWS. They had no physical infrastructure they had to manage, and so that was my first step towards towards the cloud, and I kind of just jumped straight into it. And back then it was a lot easier because you've got EC2, you've got S3, you've got SQS, and a few other services. Is nothing quite like the beast that it is today, where there's so many services. You can't, back then there was every service had an icon, a name, a description of what it does. Now you just see like 200 services, just a name. There's no space for even a logo.
Yeah, I also remember when I started 6 years ago, which is not that much, but the console was totally different. And again, I remember also having there the logos and even a small description, but yeah, it's crazy right now with so many services.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a long journey, but I think it's getting to the point now. There's almost a service for everything.
Yeah, and for sure this will increase. I mean, I'm pretty sure that in a few years it's going to be even crazier.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
All right. So you already know how many different advantages the cloud offer over owning your data center, or even yeah, having your on-premise, so to say. But there are too many advantages to talk about. We could be hours and hours. I would like you just to emphasize on those who you consider most important ones.
Sure. And I guess the advantage really depends on who you are. I mean, I used to work for investment bank, and that was actually building and running its own data centers, multiple data centers. We had to go and visit some of them sometimes, and you kind of get a glimpse into what it takes to run data centers and the cooling and all of that. But that those are significant investment. And early in the cloud, people talk about the whole idea of OPEX versus CAPEX, so operational expenditure model versus a capital expenditure model. So if you're like a multi-billion-dollar multinational conglomerate, you can spend hundreds of millions on building your own data center and all of that. But for a lot of small companies, you just don't have the investment to be able to do that, right? But with the cloud, you now don't have to have the capital expenditure to be able to invest into infrastructure like that, and yet you can compete with the biggest of companies out there, because you have the full capacity that Amazon is able to offer you. So that in terms that ability to be able to compete at a much higher level without a significant investment upfront is probably the biggest advantage for, I guess, in terms of leveling the playing field and creating more competitive marketplace. And I think that has even improved even more with the introduction of serverless technologies, whereby not just in terms of the infrastructure cost, but also in terms of the skill set that's required to build some of these applications that can scale to support millions of users and still have high availability, have be able to have the rights, have the security in place. So a lot of that has been commoditized by using things like Lambda, using databases like DynamoDB, where you just have an API, and the API itself is secured by IAM. You don't have to worry about scaling the underlying storage units. You don't have to worry about scaling the API layer. It's all done for you, and you've got multi-AZ out of the box. So in terms of being able to get things done quickly, and still be able to build something that is just as scalable and probably even more reliable than, say, your big banks and the other companies who have this really deep pocket that can build their own infrastructure. And people talk about the clouds, whenever it goes down, or Amazon having an outage, everyone is having an issue because it's very publicly visible. Like Netflix is down because Amazon is down, and or any number of services that you use, like Spotify and all these other services everybody use, is having a problem because Amazon is having an outage. But what you don't notice and you probably don't hear about is that whenever, say, a data center having problem that affects a single bank. I was working in Credit Suisse before, and the amount of times networking just goes down with a data center, and you waste a couple of days, maybe sometimes. It happens all the time, but no one talks about it because it's not publicly visible. At least it's not, at least not for the general public. It's certainly a lot of customers are complaining when the Credit Suisse data center is down, or when one of its big banks is having outages in their data centers. But they happen way more often than compared to the big outages that you see with Amazon, with Google, and so on. So reliability is a big win when it comes to cloud and the scalability as well.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you touch really important points. You made even also clear that you are very experienced in the cloud, and that you, it's clear that you have been working very long with the cloud, so you can see from very different points of view what the advantages are. So thanks for sharing that. I think it's really valuable information. So basically following this topic, I believe that cloud computing skills and knowledge, they are kind of already a standard skill that it's required in the IT industry. Do you also believe that?
I think so. I think nowadays, certainly in a lot of the areas that I operate in, everywhere you go, you probably gonna be using some kind of a public cloud. Maybe it's Amazon, maybe it's Google, maybe it's Microsoft, but pretty much everybody requires skill sets that's associated with one of the public cloud providers. And there are still a lot of companies that are not running in the cloud, but more and more of them are moving to the cloud. And certainly I'm seeing, recently I'm seeing the last, I guess 12 months, I'm seeing more and more people adopting serverless as well as the first step towards the cloud. I've had quite a few customers who are moving from on-premises data centers to the cloud, and they're going straight in with serverless, and they're coming in with I guess a high-level strategy to be serverless first. So try to use serverless if you can. If you can't, then you look at containerizing your application instead. So it's definitely going to be more and more of a standard requirement in terms of skill sets for developers and architects and solution architects and whatnot.
Yeah. You just mentioned AWS, Asia, and GCP. I will just know what are the key factors you consider when choosing one cloud provider. Depends on the use case, depends on the project, depends on the customer. What are the factors that you use?
Yeah, so that's I guess that depends on a lot of context. Certainly, from my experience, things like if you are traditionally a .NET shop and you've been using Microsoft technologies for a long time, then there's a very good chance that you may just decide to go with Azure because that is your bread and butter. You are very familiar with the Microsoft stack. You have good connection within Microsoft, and most of what you do probably can be done on the Azure anyway. You said you've got a pretty good enterprise support as well. One thing I will probably say is that as far as that is concerned, Google is probably my least favorite, just because it doesn't really do enterprise support very well or business support. You keep hearing about things like Google shutting down a service that everyone is depending on, and that's probably the last thing you want when you're building a business and you're relying on Google providing these services, and then one day decides, well, we're not making enough money on this service, we're going to shut it down. That's going to be terrible news for you if you're a business that's building on top of Google's capabilities, right? And that's something that Amazon and the Microsoft do much better. They understand the enterprise needs. They're building for enterprise, but Google has got some really interesting technical advantages. At least for a very long time, the networking was superb compared to AWS. It's been really interesting to see that AWS is getting to the point now they are offering better networking on their virtual machines, and by charging you more for those better networking capabilities. Google has come the other way, whereby they started off with much better network capabilities for their virtual machines, but more expensive. And now over time, they've started to offer cheaper alternatives that are probably closer to what you get as a default on AWS. So it's interesting to see how Google oftentimes opt for the most technically maybe interesting and advanced offering, as opposed to something that is cheap and accessible, and that seems to be I guess the approach that Amazon often does. There's some services that Google offers is like really good. I love BigQuery, and we used App Engine many years ago. That was 2010. We were using App Engine, and it was way ahead of its time in terms of how good it was. But it never really quite move to the next level. I think Google had a really good opportunity to make that turn into what we think of as serverless today, but it wasn't quite that. And they also had the Firebase as well, which they kind of just have a bit of a missed opportunity, because Firebase was a really interesting, really powerful paradigm shift to how you build the full stack applications. And I think that is a bit of a missed opportunity on Google's part as well. Other than that, I would say Amazon is by far the leader in this particular space. Certainly, maybe I'm biased because I've been working with AWS for all these like 10 years, and all my clients and a lot of my colleagues and friends are also within that AWS bubble. But from what I see, AWS is by far the most widely adopted cloud provider compared to Microsoft and Google.
So really interesting. Very good comparison, and of course I can understand that yeah, anyone is have more affinity or to one cloud provider over the other. However, nowadays I'm kind of think that the word multi-cloud it's become more trendy. I mean, I've seen during the last years more and more companies adopting a multi-cloud strategy. What do you think about these approaches?
I think in the coming years, you see more and more people regret that decision to go multi-cloud because multi-cloud is much harder than it actually sounds. And for one thing, it means that you basically have to build on the least common denominator across all the multi-cloud or all the different cloud providers, which is basically renting virtual machines. And that's probably then you're missing out on 90% of the value that you actually get from different cloud providers. Now, we need to talk about the reason why you want to go multi-cloud. I know a lot of them is probably just because, the CTOs or CXOs or whatnot have, following the latest trends because some other big companies doing the same thing. But I think really the number of companies that should be multi-cloud are very, very small. Most companies are much better off just having one cloud provider and then take full advantage of the fact that you've got multiple regions and multiple data centers in order to achieve the resilience and robustness you need for your application, even when you've got really, really high SLA requirements. I mean, AWS doesn't go down. Specific regions and data centers in AWS would have problems, but AWS as a whole doesn't go down. So you would typically just, if you need to if you have higher uptime requirements, then you can use multi-AZ, you can use multi-region to get there, as opposed to having to go for this multi-cloud strategy. Another common reason people talk about, oh, we need to do that multi-cloud because we are a financial institution and we are required to be able to move from one cloud to another within a few months. That's also a misconception. I've spoken with quite a few banks, certainly banks here in the Netherlands, about that particular requirement. And what I hear back is that it's a question that gets asked by the financial regulator, but it's not, as indicator, it's not a requirement to say that you have to be able to move from one cloud to another within a certain amount of time. That is just what the people that are reading those questionnaires kind of come up in their own head and think, oh, that must be what they meant if they ask what cloud provider we're using. From the regulator's point of view, they care about the risk exposure to, say, Amazon, but only in the sense that if, say, as the Netherlands, if all the banks all are on AWS, then that is a risk that is not acceptable. Because if Amazon, there's some issue happens between Netherlands and Amazon, then, well, your entire banking industry is in trouble. But if some of your banks is on Amazon, some of them is on Google, some of them is on Microsoft, then it's okay. Your risk is spread. But it's not saying that every single bank needs to be multi-cloud. It's just that as an industry sector, there should be a good distribution of different cloud providers so that your risk is not entirely on one provider. But on the individual companies, this doesn't mean that they all have to pursue this multi-cloud strategy. In fact, quite a few of the more sort of progressive thinking and the forward-thinking financial institutions here in the Netherlands are all gone full in on the AWS and full in on serverless, and realizing that is where you're going to get most of the value from the cloud provider that you choose to work with anyway. And as for the actual multi-cloud itself, it's much harder to pull off when you have to consider that, okay, you not only have to have not only that you can't use any of the managed services because, you can't take GCP's BigQuery and have the exact same thing in AWS or in Azure. So you have to essentially, run your own infrastructure on just the raw VMs. That's the layer of common denominator you have. But then the performance is different on every single cloud. The security model is different on every single cloud. And then there's also the uptime requirements is different, so that if you're not careful, you may also end up with, in a case where you have many single points of failure, that any of the clouds, if you're like in one transaction, if you have to hit Google, Amazon, and Azure, then any of the cloud having a problem, then your entire transaction is having a problem, right? So instead of having one single point of failure, you got many of them. So your uptime is actually going to be worse than if you just say, put everything into AWS, but have multi-region and multi-AZ as your strategy for resilience. And in terms of the actual operational side of things, you know how hard it is to find people with the good and deep understanding of AWS and all the services it offers and all the nuances around networking, all that. Now multiply that by people you need to hire that knows all three, because somehow you need to make this thing work across all the different providers, and somehow you need to be able to, I guess, work around the fact that they all have different security models, and you need to have different tools that allows people to access different cloud providers and see the consoles and all of that. Then all of a sudden, the cost of implementing something like that becomes pretty astronomical. And when you think about, in terms of the being able to be competitive, every company I speak with, they all talk about, we want to be faster. I mean, why are we so slow? Guess what? If you're going to have to maintain a multi-cloud strategy on top of, actually trying to deliver business value to your customers, it's going to be much harder for you to be agile, to be competitive compared to other people in the marketplace. So, and it's, especially in the world we live in now, where it's so easy for someone to build something, release something, and then just quickly iterate on their products if they're using the right services and taking full advantage of the relationship that they're building with, say, one cloud provider. Then, yeah, I think you're going to put yourself into a massive disadvantage by adopting multi-cloud strategy, unless you know exactly what you're doing, and very few companies actually do.
That was really an excellent answer. I mean, I really loved that real case with the banks, and I totally agree on what you mean. Especially on the adding that complexity layer on maintaining on all those providers, as well as the team. That's a huge, I will say, difficulty for your team, because they have to know how these all cloud providers works. They have to maintain all of them. They have to be constantly up to date, because as you already know, the cloud providers, they are constantly adding new features, updating their products, and the portfolio is huge. So it's very, very difficult. Thank you very much for sharing that. That was really, really interesting.
Yeah, I've seen a few cases where a company end up building their own abstraction layer that kind of mimics S3, and that can work with S3 and can work with Google Cloud Storage and the Amazon and the Microsoft is equivalent. And you just find that like stuff like that adds like a year delay to projects, because they can't keep up with all the different changes that's on underlying different platforms. And there's a lot of bugs. There's a lot of just issues with their own layer of abstraction. And also it just never quite as good as what you get with the underlying service you get with AWS or with Google, because you're trying to find something that works across all three of them. So you see a lot of this kind of things that adds 12 months, 18 months delay to a project that should be done in 2 weeks. It's like the amount of overhead is just it's silly, it's crazy.
Yeah. And additionally, the cloud ecosystem is very broad. I mean, you can have products or you even have topics around machine learning, around serverless, around databases. The topics are really a lot. Yeah, just curious. I already know your answer, but I would like you to share with us your focus area inside the cloud. And what are you most interested in?
Yeah, sure. My focus is around serverless. But when I say serverless, I don't mean just the Lambda. Really mean that any services whereby you don't, I guess that's got those same characteristics where you don't pay for them when they're not running, and or rather when no one's using your services, and you don't have to worry about provisioning machine images. You don't have to worry about patching, machine images or Docker images. You don't have to worry about provisioning, scaling, thresholds, and all of that. I spent, I guess, the first 5-6 years of my journey with AWS doing that all the time, and you find that I mean, it's great that you can get a new VM within a few minutes, and that's a lot better compared to what I was working with before, where we would have like a 6-month project to get a new server added to our data center to run our web app that gets used by 20 people in the bank. But still, I spend a lot of my time just dealing with infrastructure stuff, and I know I'm not doing a very good job because my machine images are certainly not up to date in terms of all the latest OS patches and things like that. Because I've got other stuff I got to do. I got to actually build the application, not just maintain the infrastructure. Or you find company that's got a whole team of people that are maintaining the environment with all the networking configurations, with all the permissions and all of that. Which again, when using serverless, you just don't need those specialized skills a lot of time, because you can have a small team of engineers who are capable of maintaining that as well as your application, because the amount of infrastructure overhead in terms of maintenance is much lower when it comes to serverless compared to using server for components. And depending on your workload, you will find them that they will be a lot cheaper to run on serverless as well if you don't have to pay for them and when there's no one using them. Of course, when you've got actually high throughput the system, then maybe you have to say, okay, I've got this API, it's not super complicated, but it's handling like 10,000 requests per second. So running on Lambda is actually quite expensive, especially with, Lambda and API gateway is quite expensive. So maybe in that case, I'll just take the API and put run it on the containers, and I put an ALB in front of it. Maybe that would be a lot cheaper. But the question you're going to ask at that point is, well, it may be cheaper on my AWS bill, but do I have the skill set to look after this scalable containerized infrastructure that can scale to support, I don't know, when we get to 50,000 requests per second, or do I have to hire a whole team of engineers to look after this whole infrastructure? And if you have got to do that, and by going to the market and hire people, now every person I hire is going to be what, $10,000 a month. So am I saving enough on my AWS bill to actually pay for the staffing cost? If not, then on total cost of ownership, I'm actually making a worse decision in terms of cost compared to if I just use a serverless. So I think when you look at cost, you got to think about total cost of ownership and look at the skill sets you need to run, say, a containerized environment versus what you have in the company. What was the question? Is the ground my focus, right? Right. So my focus is on things that are, around serverless, not just Lambda, but also things like DynamoDB, API Gateway, AppSync. Big fan of AppSync. And nowadays, last couple of projects I've done is all with AppSync, and I think you can get so much done with less time and effort, because AppSync just and GraphQL I guess makes a lot of the common chores you find with API Gateway much simpler. You don't have to acquire as much custom code for basic CRUD operations, and the things like group-based authentication is really simple, just one line compared to what you got to do with API Gateway. And I think there's just I don't know, from my experience the last maybe a year and a half, AppSync just makes application development much more easy, and you can get things done very quickly. And a couple of times now, I've built a project for a client, the entire backend on my own, working part-time for just a few weeks, and I can do that because I was using AppSync and Lambda and DynamoDB as my core stack.
Yeah, I'm also a big fan of serverless. It makes things so easy and so fast. However, I'm not that experienced as you, but I'm getting hard into that. I saw that you are very, very active in social networks, sharing your knowledge with the community, writing blogs, even also with a podcast. Yeah, could you share with us, what did you started all that, and basically why are you doing this?
Yeah, I started blogging, I say about 9 or maybe 8, 9 years ago. It's been doing it consistently for quite a long time now. At least put out maybe 2 posts a month for as long as I can remember. So I've been doing it for a very long time, and it has definitely helped myself as much as helps other people, because when you learn something, you know, and you have to teach somebody else, that's when you find out that there are gaps in your own knowledge. So, you know, when you try to write something down and explain how it works with somebody else, then you realize, wait a minute, how does these 2 things connect together? What's that thing in the middle? And how does this actually sort of, you know, flow through in terms of information? And then you realize, okay, I don't actually fully understand this myself. And then you go and learn some more. So I think writing has definitely been great for my own learning, as well as just in terms of sharing with others and building up a network of people who are also interested in similar technologies that I am. And also I've got a lot of people who now coming to me for consulting and advice and giving me work, because they've been reading my blog posts for a long time. They have followed my work for a long time. So now when there's a chance comes up, then we work together. So that's been great. I mean, I'm building my entire, I guess, the consulting business on this whole, this whole brand I've been building for a very long time, in terms of all the things I'm doing publicly, all the talks, all the blog posts, videos, and now the podcast as well. But yeah, it's something that is definitely works. Well, I guess it takes at least for me, it's taken time to build up that brand and that presence. But it has definitely paid off in a big way.
Yeah, very happy for that, and congratulations. I mean, doing it's quite, I will say, easy, but doing it well, like you are doing, that's the difficult part.
Yeah, I think consistency is the key, and consistency is the hard part. Finding time and also making time to do that every week, yeah, it's, especially when you've got like a full-time job and you've got a family and all that, it's not easy, but it's worth it though. It's worth it.
Yeah, I think exactly the same. I know that you learn a lot of things every day, and I see that on your blogs that you are continuous learning, because as we already mentioned, the cloud providers doesn't stop and don't wait for us. They just keep going and releasing new features and new products. Could you share with us what was one of your latest things that you learned about cloud?
In terms of I guess, I mean, I've been working on a new product I'm building for doing transcriptions, because for a lot of my video courses, my wife has been helping me transcribe transcribe and add subtitle to my videos that I publish. And so I've been trying to build a tool for her to use, and I think I'll build it well enough that I can actually turn into a product that I can sell to other people. So I've been looking at spending quite a bit of time with the media services that Amazon offers, in terms of things like AWS Transcribe, Media Convert, and a few other services in that particular sort of area for dealing with multimedia. And it's interesting, and trying to and also learning a lot about some of the I guess some of the APIs in that particular space, and trying to get them to do what I need in a way that's cheap, because I gotta cut down on my own cloud cost when I sell this as a service to other people.
Oh, that's really
learning a lot of front-end development as well. I've been doing a lot of work with Vue.js. It's different. It's a whole new, it's a ball game for me.
Yeah, looking forward to see that product there and to test it. I'm pretty excited right now. Yeah. Just the last question. We are almost over. Just I would like to know, which are the sources that you use to keep yourself up to date? I know that you are writing your blog, and that's a way of being up to date, so to say, in the focus area that you are. However, yeah, just share with us.
Yeah, I think I use Twitter a lot for finding useful things to read. I follow a lot of people on Twitter that oftentimes when I see them post things, I'll go and read it. In terms of other sort of sites, I often go to places like Corey Queeniscut, does some really good takedown posts about very different things, very honest, very snarky, but I like it. And then there's Jeremy Daly has got a good newsletter. He runs a lot of the blog posts around serverless. But I think nowadays he's seeing more and more the same sort of idea and same sort of similar idea and content being written. So, but still, I loved reading about some of the use cases people have. And then, and other than that, I think I just read a lot of various different places. I find the articles to read from Twitter. I think Twitter has been probably the number one source for me to find good articles to read.
Well, that's really interesting. By the way, Jeremy Daly was also in this podcast. I will recommend you to take a look into it. It was really interesting. He was sharing also his cloud journey and quite interesting. That was basically it. We are already finished. I would like to thank you, Yan, for your time, for participating in the podcast, and for sharing all your knowledge and experience. I think the quality of the content is amazing. You did share a lot of personal experience working with different customers, which is, amazing. Thank you very much for that. All right.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Then, see you in the next podcast. Bye-bye.
Take care.